Hello and welcome to the Jet Press Podcast. My name is Justin Fried, and I'm joined for the first time ever by my man Mike Luciano. Mike, what's going on, man? How you doing?
How's it going, Justin? I am thrilled to be on the Jet Press Podcast. Let's get this thing started.
Dude, I know. We have been trying to get this started for a while now. It's been a long time coming. It's been months in the making, honestly. I know there's a lot of great Jets content out there, a lot of great Jets podcasts. We're just trying to throw our hats in the ring and just, talk some Jets. I'm excited. Are you excited, Mike?
I am thrilled, and what a day to start on because, my goodness, we check up on Twitter earlier in the day, and then we see Mike LaFleur fired as the offensive coordinator of the New York Jets, and then we wait about 15 minutes, and we refresh Twitter. Mike LaFleur is not fired. He is still the offensive coordinator of the New York Jets, and this is going to be a topic that really dominates the offseason for a couple of reasons, honestly. Most importantly, because the fan base is getting very polarized right now. There's firm pro-LaFleur, anti-LaFleur camps. I think both you and I are firmly in the, I would say, pro-LaFleur camp, because this is a guy who comes from that Shanahan system where pretty much everybody except him. So either he's the one guy from the Shanahan system that doesn't work, or he's just this genius. So who knows?
Yeah,
so LaFleur. The problem that I have with everybody all of a sudden just bailing on LaFleur. Let's just take a look at his quarterbacks for a little bit. Zach Wilson, unplayably bad. Let's not sugarcoat things. Unplayably bad at times. Joe Flacco, there were times where he looked like he'd rather be in Guantanamo Bay than on the sidelines, especially during that Jaguars game on the sideline where Strevler came in. I mean, that's how dire that Mike White trying his best playing with 5 shattered ribs. You can't evaluate a guy with this quarterback situation. Like, let's be real here.
It's tough. It's been a wild day, I think, for Jets fans, especially Jets Twitter. From the Aaron Wilson report late in the morning, it was probably like 11:30 or something, that said the Jets were going to part ways with Mike LaFleur. To moments later, numerous Jets beat reporters kind of refuting that claim. It's been a wild day. I don't know what the Jets are doing with Mike LaFleur, but I am with you in that, and I think I know we're 100% in the minority here, that I do believe the Jets should keep Mike LaFleur. I think he's an imperfect offensive coordinator who has been dealt a very, very difficult hand over the first couple of years of his career as a play caller. He has had the worst quarterback play in the NFL over the last 2 years. And of course, you can definitely put some of that blame on him, and he will take some of the heat for Zach Wilson's failures. 100%. The Jets' job was to develop Zach Wilson, and Zach Wilson has, if anything, regressed. So that, I think the play caller, the offensive coordinator, will take some heat for that. But ultimately, I think he's created a scheme that has been proven to work with 4 different quarterbacks at different points. He's
Josh Johnson, for crying out loud.
Josh Johnson had a really good game within this scheme last year. So it's tough to evaluate the guy. I do think, and the Jets have already said that regardless of what happens with Mike LaFleur, they will be bringing in a veteran offensive mind, whether that's a Greg Olsen or Gary Kubiak or whoever, to at a bare minimum pair with Mike LaFleur. We still don't know. He could be fired. And there's going to be some speculation that Aaron Wilson's report is accurate, essentially. And basically, you could argue that maybe he came forward with the report before he should have, and it wasn't confirmed, but it still might happen. We really don't know. But I still am in the camp that I'd like to see Mike LaFleur get another year.
I'd like to see him get another year, mostly because I'm not a fan of people just saying fire the offensive coordinator, because number one, that's pretty much just an easy catch-all situation for someone's bad on the offense, get rid of them. Like, unless you got a proven guy that can come right in and immediately make the offense better. Like, obviously this is complete fairy dreamland because he's getting head coaching interviews. If you were saying, all right, we're going to fire Mike LaFleur, but we got Frank Reich coming in, then that's a perfect situation. I'd be totally fine with that. But who are you going to hire? Because number one, either you're going to hire a position coach from one of the best offenses in the league, which is basically what LaFleur was as the passing game coordinator for San Francisco anyway. So it's not really changing much. It's just rearranging the deck chairs. Or you're going to get a retread who's just fired elsewhere.
Yeah, unless you are going to get someone, like you said, that is a proven commodity, I don't think the Jets would do this. And I also don't think it would be a Robert Saleh decision. This would be a decision likely coming down from ownership, likely coming down from Woody Johnson, who basically wants someone to blame for the Jets' failures. The Jets lost their final 6 games of the season. They didn't score a touchdown in the last 3 games. They were 29th in points per game. The Jets had a bad offense this year. They had a bad offense last year. And if you want a scapegoat and you're looking for somebody to blame, Mike LaFleur is the obvious candidate. I think that if anything we know about Robert Saleh is that he wants consistency, he wants stability, he wants to let his young players and his young coaches grow and develop. The issue is that Woody Johnson might not feel the same way. I'm not sure where Joe Douglas would lay on this. I think that he would agree more with Saleh, and I think he'd be more on Saleh's side, but we really don't know. We should find out some clarity on the situation within the coming days, but we don't really know right now. Mike, I'll throw this out there, though. If the Jets were to move on from Mike LaFleur, who is it that you would want? I know you already threw out Frank Reich. What are some names, if you have some on hand, that you think the Jets should target if they do move on from Mike LaFleur?
Well, you brought up Greg Olsen earlier. For those who don't know, Greg Olsen has had a couple stints with the Raiders as an offensive coordinator, helping a certain quarterback named Derek Carr, who, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, could end up being on the Jets next year. So that at least makes sense. The offense was very similar. I'm going to throw out a bit of an unconventional option that I think could really work. And this is not a guy who has connections to Saleh, which is going to be a huge factor in the decision-making. So if Saleh decides to get out of his comfort zone, hire somebody he's not familiar with, how about Todd Monken from Georgia, who with Stetson Bennett, all right, Stetson Bennett, national championship winner, that's great. He's 25 years old playing 19-year-old kids. I mean, this is Chris Wenke levels of the difference in physical talent here, especially with all the guys around him. But remember back when he was in the NFL with Tampa Bay earlier, I mean, he had Ryan Fitzpatrick throwing for 9 yards an attempt in Tampa. I mean, that was as gung-ho, bombs away, fearless in offense as possible. And then he goes over to Cleveland. He honestly was not great with Cleveland, but that was Freddie Kitchens too. So that was just a complete, you almost want to just write that off and go, all right, sorry, I had to deal with Freddie Kitchens. People forget too, Monken actually, I believe, interviewed for the Jets job before they hired Gase.
Yeah, that was part of that hiring cycle. He had a lot of interviews that year.
So if you want to say, all right, we're bringing in Todd Monken and we're just going to go 4 verts, chuck it deep to Garrett Wilson, I could get behind that. If you're just going to go hire another Shanahan guy who's an assistant right now, or try to drag Gary Kubiak, who's probably smoking a cigar on a beach somewhere, and say, hey, go work with Zach Wilson, I'd prefer Todd Monken.
Yeah, I think Monken would be very much a Woody Johnson decision. That would be Woody Johnson just throwing money at someone.
Well, firing LaFleur would probably be a Woody Johnson decision anyway, so why not just...
Exactly. So if they were to move on from LaFleur, I like Mike LaFleur. I'm a Mike LaFleur defender, but if they can get Todd Monken and bring someone like him in here, absolutely do that. Like, I don't hesitate. The Jets shouldn't hesitate. The issue is obviously that's so difficult. I do love that shout though. I did have as a cheap plug. I had an article come out recently. It was 9 coordinators the Jets could potentially hire to replace Mike LaFleur, and I'm convinced that Aaron Wilson sent out that tweet just to spike up the traffic on that because it's been doing well.
Thanks, Aaron Wilson.
Thanks, buddy.
Scratch your back, you scratch yours.
Yeah, but I did have Todd Monken listed on that as kind of just a pipe dream situation, right? Where it's more so just if they want to swing for the fences and they want to throw a lot of money at a guy who is a proven commodity, Monken makes sense. He did have a stint, like you said, with the Browns. And unfortunately, that kind of just tanked his value because it was the ill-fated Freddie Kitchens here, like you mentioned. He's revitalized his career, revitalized his resume at Georgia. And if he wants to make the move back to the NFL, I'm not saying the Jets are the most likely team to get him. I definitely don't think so. And I'm not sure he even wants to move because honestly, why would he at this stage? But if he's open to it and the Jets are willing to just throw money at him, do it. I think another guy that kind of falls in that same camp is a Cliff Kingsbury, another guy who made his career in college. Of course, he was just fired by the Arizona Cardinals. Who knows? He might want to take off a year. There's a lot of moving parts with that, but I mean, heck, the guy is a proven play caller. He's been around. He's run a lot of successful offenses in his career. He's done a lot of great work with obviously he coached Patrick Mahomes. I think he's somebody that if you want to just throw the bag at and say, hey, let's do everything we can to bring him in. Now, again, he doesn't have any ties to the coaching staff. And again, if there's one thing we know about Robert Saleh and honestly NFL coaches is that they choose familiarity over other options. Kingsbury does not have any ties to the coaching staff. He's not a Greg Olsen. He's not a Doug Marrone, whoever you're going to throw out there, right? But he is a proven commodity. And it's someone that, you might run into like a Greg Williams situation where Woody Johnson goes like ownership points and says, hey, we want this guy and we're going to pair you with this coaching staff, regardless of what the coaches think. I would be on board with that. I'd be on board with Kingsbury. I'd be on board with Monken, more so than like a Doug Marrone or, Greg Olsen, I'd be
Doug
cool.
Marrone?
I'm throwing out guys who have history with Robert Saleh, right? Doug Marrone, Nathaniel Hackett is another one that'll probably be thrown around a lot. That history in Seattle. Greg
All right,
Olson.
if the Jets imagine just I want to stop you right there because I want to imagine just look into the future a little bit. Imagine there's all this consternation and toing and froing about who's going to be the offensive coordinator, and they hire Nathaniel Hackett after what we just saw in Denver.
Yeah,
They might that's a reading a riot act. That is reading a riot act right there.
It would be tough to sell in the fan base. And, Woody in the past has shown that he cares a lot about what Jets fans think. So it would be tough to sell Nathaniel Hackett. I think it's a lot easier to sell Kingsbury. Obviously, it'd be easy to sell Monken. Other names that I had on that list that are just kind of guys who have experience in the NFL and have connections with Robert Saleh. Jay Gruden is an interesting option. He didn't actually cross paths, I don't believe, with Saleh, but he did with Ron Middleton in Tampa and Jacksonville. So that's one. Another one that I've not seen anybody mention, and I don't know how realistic it would be, but Troy Calhoun, who's the head coach at Air Force, he's been the head coach since like 2007. He was a part of Gary Kubiak's first staff in Houston, along with Robert Saleh. I think that'd be an interesting decision. Air Force has had a lot of success in recent years. They've had very successful offenses. I have no idea if Troy Calhoun would want to go to the NFL, but I'm just,
as a run game coordinator, I wouldn't mind it if he's just doing the run game. But now here's the one problem I have with all these names you threw out. Let's just look at the situation if they fire Mike LaFleur, who I believe was the 11th or 12th offensive coordinator in the last 23 years.
Yeah, I think he's ninth
they
in the last.
Turn it through, guys. So here's the more concerning part about it. Is you're going to say, hey, come work with the Jets. As of now, it might change. As of now, your starting quarterback is Zach Wilson. You essentially have a playoff mandate. Otherwise, everybody's getting fired, including you. You have your running back, who admittedly is amazing, coming off an ACL injury. 2 wide receivers, Elijah Moore, Denzel Mims, have said in the past they don't want to be there. The offensive line is still a mess, and you got to hit the ground running immediately. Why is that an attractive situation? So if you try to go after guys with options that can go to one of a bunch of different teams, why would they go to the Jets?
Agree. Unless money talks that much, which when it comes to coaching, it generally doesn't, because coaches aren't really willing to sacrifice their careers or sacrifice their resumes for a situation that they deem to be failing. I think that a lot of people know that if the Jets don't make the playoffs in 2023, or if they don't, I'm not saying it's a definite playoff mandate, but if they don't have a really good reason why they didn't make the playoffs, that Saleh's job's on the line, as is Joe Douglas, and the Jets could completely clean house. That is totally on the table. And I think any offensive coordinator that they would look to bring in to replace Mike LaFleur would know that as well. So I agree with you. I don't know if there would be they would have the most appealing, or they'd be the most appealing destination to a coaching candidate out there, which could limit their options, which again, it's why I would stick with LaFleur. I would stick with LaFleur. Bring in somebody. They already said they're going to do it, but absolutely bring in somebody to be that experienced veteran mind in the coaching staff. The guy that, it's been talked about ad nauseum at this point, but the role that Greg Knapp was supposed to fill before his tragic passing. They obviously didn't really have much of a choice in 2021 when Greg Knapp passed away. 2022, they opted not to bring in another veteran coach because they wanted to, as the Jets have said, kind of limit the noise in the quarterback room. They wanted to get less chefs less cooks in the kitchen. Is that what it is?
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, there you go. That one. They wanted to get less cooks in the kitchen. They just kind of wanted to limit the noise around Zach Wilson, have, instead of 5 guys telling him what to do, maybe 2 guys. They did that. Obviously, the results weren't promising. So that was the issue the mistake they made there. But I don't think that they're going to make that mistake in 2023. They're going to bring in a veteran guy, whether it's to replace Mike LaFleur or whether it's to work with Mike LaFleur. They're definitely bringing in someone.
The Mike LaFleur critics, I just wanted to ask, because they, Mike LaFleur's terrible, his play calling's vanilla. Like, what does he need to do that he is not doing that will make Zach Wilson good? Because this Zach Wilson question is just going to hover over this team until he either balls out next year, which highly unlikely considering some of the numbers, or they get rid of him. And when you look at Zach Wilson's season in totality, or his first 2 years in totality, not only have they been bad, 54% completion rate, 54. Guys complete 66 regularly. This is 54. It's like we're watching football from 1983. These numbers are not just bad, they're historically bad. If you look at EPA, completion percentage over expected, stats like that for guys that have come in the last 10 years or a little over the last 10 years, look at some of the names he's alongside. Josh Rosen, John Skelton from Fordham, Shout out Fordham Rams. I mean,
Still,
Blaine Gabbert, Deshaun Kaiser. Like, it's not an exaggeration to say Zach Wilson, even he's not Achilles Smith, David Klingler level bad, but he's still kind of on that fence. If he becomes even an average, or who's average starter in the league right now? Ryan Tannehill, probably. If he even becomes like a Ryan Tannehill level player, that would be one of the most improbable, insane comebacks, reinventions, whatever you want, in league history. That's how unprecedented it would be. Are
yeah.
you willing to tie both yourself as a coordinator and as a coach, Robert Saleh, as a GM, Joe Douglas, to that? Because right now, they really don't have a plan going forward. They have a dream. Whilst admirable, it's a dream. It's just foolish to only go into that next year saying, all right, maybe if we just get someone else around Zach Wilson, then we'll all be fine.
Yeah, I think the Jets kind of see Zach Wilson as a developmental plan. They're not looking at him as somebody that they're going to rely on in any way to start next year. Honestly, they're kind of probably looking at him if he's even on the roster, which of course that's the $1 million question. But if he's on the roster, it's going to be in essentially a redshirt role. I don't think that they're going to want him even as the second string. And if they did, that would be gross malpractice, honestly. If Zach Wilson came back in 2023 and was the primary backup, that's a problem. Like somebody,
when you hear quotes like "come hell or high water, we're developing this guy." I mean, that is a full-throated defense
it
of
is.
Zach Wilson and of Joe Douglas's scouting.
It
So
is.
I'm
Also,
operating as if he's going to get consideration for that starting job.
I think the coaches are saying the right thing. I think they're saying what they have to say. Also, they're saying what they have to say to increase his trade value. Because if they even hint that they are willing to move on from him, that already decreases his trade value right there. If the Jets get a trade package that they think is good enough, whatever that is, I'm not going to even estimate what their internal valuation is on Zach Wilson. But if they get a trade package that they think is worth it, they probably will move on. Unless Woody Johnson is in Joe Douglas's ear saying you cannot trade Zach Wilson, which you can't discount that. I would like to believe that that's not the case. Woody, for the most part, and Christopher Johnson, they've kind of stayed out of Joe Douglas's way during his time here, which has been a great thing. I would really hope that Woody Johnson wouldn't step in now and just start meddling, but it's Woody Johnson. You never know. He has a history of doing stuff like that. But I do think that they're not necessarily tied to him being on the roster next year. I think that they definitely could move on. And if they don't, he's going to be the third string. They're not going to rely on him as the third string. Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh know that the Jets need to succeed next year. They need to make the playoffs. And if they don't, they need a damn good reason why they didn't make the playoffs. And having Zach Wilson even as the backup is already just potentially tanking those plans. He's not going to be in the situation. Like he's not going to factor into the starting quarterback picture in 2023, barring numerous injuries.
Here's the problem that I have with just the concept of, Zach Wilson's a developmental guy for the Jets at this point, which number one, like, this was mentioned when Wilson had those comments after the Patriot. I didn't let the defense down. It's like, oh, really? 3 points? Okay. Like, who has lost a locker room, especially to that level where it's a starting quarterback in year 2 and then got it back? So immediately, like, why even keep him around? Would he even want to be back at this point? I mean, it just seems like the relationships are broken. And number 2, what's always been the big thing beyond the ability to read the field, beyond accuracy deep down the field, mechanically, has always been the problem. Just his footwork, his ability to process and quickly in drops. That's been his big issue. And do you really think, like, I'm not saying the Jets have the best coaches ever. Do you think they're just not telling him these things? Of course they're trying to tell him these things, and it's just not working. I just don't believe hiring a new offensive coordinator. Like, Greg Olson's an okay offensive coordinator. I just don't think Wilson mentally is at a spot where he's going to be able to absorb things that quickly in like a couple months and then turn things around.
Yeah, no, he's mentally broken right now. Like, there's no other way of putting it. I know we got Kevin Chat saying that JD trading Zach Wilson is admitting he failed at number 2. Yeah, but also I would argue that getting fired after this coming season is also admission of failure, at least from the Jets ownership. I don't think that Joe Douglas at this stage, and I know we've seen him kind of show an unwillingness to admit failure. We can talk about, keeping Braden Mann for as long as he has and other moves, but I don't think that he's going to let his pride and ego get in the way of moving Zach Wilson at this stage. I think that would be a Woody Johnson decision. Joe Douglas knows the Jets need to make the playoffs in 2023. Like he knows that. Otherwise, his job is on the line. If you're fighting for your job as a GM, and you're still letting your pride and ego get in the way, then you're already losing the battle. And I think better of Joe Douglas than for him to let that happen. It would be an admission of failure. You're absolutely correct. It absolutely would be.
Well,
But
I
I
thought the
also
benching was an admission of failure, if I'm being perfectly honest. How many
that's a great
starts was
point.
he in? Like 19, 20?
That's a great point. Now,
And they're saying, yeah.
how many second overall picks are benched that early into their career? You know, I think that the Jets already doing that, like you said, Mike, that's a great point, is an admission of failure. So I don't think the Jets are afraid to admit failure with Zach Wilson. In fact, they literally had Mike LaFleur go out there. I mean, I'm not sure if he was authorized to say it, but Mike LaFleur in his postseason press conference said that the Jets probably should have sat him his first year, right? That is the definition of an
Oh,
admission of
really? Like,
like that's
hindsight
the
2020.
yeah, that's the definition of an admission of failure. And it's not even an admission of failure of his part. That's an admission of failure on the ownership or on the front office. So I don't think that will get in the way. My hunch right now is that Zach Wilson will be back in 2023. I don't think that they're going to, knowing Joe Douglas, I don't think he's going to just trade him away for anything. They need to get something that's going to meet their valuation. And again, I'm not going to even speculate. Who knows what it could be. But if they don't get that valuation, he's going to be on the roster probably just in a developmental role, which sucks because then you have to kind of roster 3 quarterbacks the entire year, which, I know they did this year anyway, but a lot of teams don't like doing that. But I do think that's the most likely outcome.
Well, I think things could change because if you look at, especially this year, how many teams need quarterbacks and how weak of a quarterback draft. This reminds me of the 2015 quarterback draft where everybody knew Jameis Winston was going to go number 1. Everybody knew Mariota was going to go number 2. And then I don't think we had anybody picked until Garrett Grayson and Sean Mannion in the 3rd round. Now, obviously, it's a little bit better than that because you got Will Levis and Anthony Richardson, but I still have my doubts about both of them. I'm not even sure Richardson's a first-round pick at this point. So there's going to be a lot of teams clamoring, especially with guys that have older quarterbacks like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers potentially considering retirement. So it's this really interesting dichotomy going on because at one point you're like, oh, if they get like a 2, like the Cardinals got for Josh Rosen, then you do that. Well, who would offer him that? Well, teams are desperate. You never know. If they get a good trade offer, maybe a team like Arizona with Kyler Murray being hurt for the first couple games of the year, I think you have to consider. I know they'd be eating a lot of money, but at the same point, I think if Joe Douglas is also serious about making the postseason and erasing that Wilson blemish on his resume, in addition to the Becton blemish, which is also not looking very good right now, I feel like let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's just forget this even happened. Let's just get a 3rd-round pick, use it on like a backup cornerback, and move on from here, Excelsior. I think keeping him around just kind of permeates this whole like stench of failure that's currently around the Jets right now, and it has been for the last couple months.
Yeah, Kev's got another comment. He said, thoughts on Steve Young stating that Mike LaFleur tough love stance doesn't work on Zach Wilson. What does that say about Zach Wilson? I think that every quarterback obviously is different. Every human being, every person is different. I don't know if that's necessarily a strong indictment on Zach Wilson. I think that every coaching staff just needs to know who they're dealing with, and every quarterback just handles it differently. Now, that's not saying that you should go all like Kyler Murray and stuff, because I think the Cardinals have that's another story, obviously, but lack of maturity and everything along those lines. I don't know if it's necessarily a direct indictment on Zach Wilson, but I will say that, of course, Steve Young knows Zach Wilson very well. He knows what works with him. He knows what doesn't work with him. I think back to the kind of the point which you were saying before, Mike, is that Zach Wilson's failures are very much, I'd say, on himself more than the Jets. I think that, especially like you were bringing up the stats before of all the quarterbacks that he's kind of comparable to statistically, whether it's John Skelton, Deshaun Kaiser, Josh Rosen, Jamarcus Russell, whoever.
Jake Locker.
Jake. Jake. Well, Jake Locker was all right.
Right. Where's the bar for you, Justin? Jake Locker is all right.
Better than the other guys, I'd say. He's not Zach Mettenberger bad, but I would say
not Zach Mettenberger bad. That's not an accomplishment.
Didn't he get benched in the XFL, Zach Mettenberger? I think he did.
You bet he did. So did Christian Hackenberg.
Well, at least he played.
I think Mettenberger came in for Christian Hackenberg.
That would make sense. But anyway, I think that when you look at those guys, the guys you can compare to Zach Wilson, they all had significantly worse supporting casts and worse situations that they were in, which is and that's not saying Zach Wilson's in a perfect situation, but this isn't the Chicago Bears. The Jets roster is not bad. They have a great wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. They had a great running back in Breece Hall. They have another good playmaker, Elijah Moore. They have 2 good tight ends. The offensive line, while terrible over the last stretch of the season, wasn't awful before then. It was league average to probably below average.
Yeah, it's fine. The
LaFleur,
offensive line's one of those things where fans just, oh, nobody's blocking. It's like, well, Zach Wilson holds the ball for 4 seconds. Like, how long do you want him to sustain blocks here?
so I would say that his failures are primarily on Zach Wilson. So yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely things that the Jets coaching staff could have done differently with Zach Wilson. Whether specifically Mike LaFleur, you could argue that hey, he probably didn't play to his strengths when Zach Wilson was out there. He didn't get him on the move enough. You could absolutely make those arguments. Maybe they could have handled him, emotionally better. Maybe they could have personally spoke to him differently. But bottom line is Zach Wilson's bad. Like he's just been a bad NFL quarterback through 2 years. I do think to answer the question, that he is on the roster next year. I do think he will be on the roster, but I also don't think it's a formality. And even if he is on the roster, he's not going to factor into the quarterback situation, at least the starting quarterback situation.
The only way I really have a problem with, the only thing rather, in the way that the Jets coaches handled Zach Wilson would be, I felt like they gave him a lot of mixed messages early in his career because early in those Carolina games, even early in that New England game, they were letting him rip it deep down the field because they want to take advantage of the great arm strength and the off-platform throws and all those things. And then he started throwing those horrible interceptions. They're like, all right, don't do any of that and be super safe. So he's kind of had these two competing philosophies sort of beating him down. And then he's like, well, what do you want out of me? So in a sense, I could get that. But at the same time, this is what makes some of that Mike LaFleur criticism so crazy to me. Like, the offense is good. LaFleur is getting guys open. I mean, Garrett Wilson, 1,100 yards. That doesn't just happen by accident. And what you're saying is, oh, yeah, LaFleur is occasionally not a great play caller, so therefore fire him and try to make Zach Wilson work again? Like, it'd be one thing, again, if Wilson was just flatlining or slight improvements, but not quite there. Almost like what Geno Smith did his second year, where he made a little bit of improvement, but he just wasn't quite there. I mean, he's regressing. I mean, this is bad. Like, we remember that Jacksonville game. I mean, that Jacksonville game.
I was there. I was at the game. I sat in the.
So you know better than anybody. That felt like the end. That felt like the absolute end. Put him in the dirt. R.I.P. Zach Wilson as a Jet.
Yeah. I think a big issue that the Jets coaching staff ran into with Zach Wilson this year was the kind of conflicting schools of thought of we want to develop Zach Wilson, but we also want to make the playoffs. And I think that's why you had those two different kind of philosophies going out there. On one hand, you want to develop Zach Wilson, you want to play to his strengths, and you want to let him go out there and make mistakes and learn from them. But on the other hand, you want to make the playoffs, and you want to start the guy who's going to give you the best chance of doing that. And they believe that was Mike White. And in hindsight, yeah, I'd certainly argue it was Mike White. I don't want to hear the QB wins people. That's not to say that Mike White is great, but he was clearly.
Kenny Pickett's probably great. They're probably loving Kenny Pickett right now.
Oh, I'm sure. Sam Darnold won a game with like 40 passing yards last week.
Oh, yeah, Darnold's great. 4-2 he went with the Panthers. Yeah. They're probably loving that.
Yeah, but and so I think that was the issue in that they benched him early, probably earlier than a lot of teams would have, because they were trying to make the playoffs and because they realized that it's two reasons. They realized one, that they needed better quarterback play if they're going to make the playoffs, that they could not make the playoffs with Zach Wilson playing that way. But also two, he was just, we touched on it before, so mentally broken and just like he was doing more damage to himself going out there every week. He was doing damage.
He had the yips. He was Steve Blatz. He was Rick Ankiel. He was Mackie Sasser. He's skipping screens. He's overthrowing guys in the flat. Like, these aren't just coaching tweaks that need to be made. This is a full-scale teardown you got to do.
Yeah. Kev's got another point here. And we touched on this before, but I agree. He said it was a disaster to have all rookie coaches teach a raw but talented quarterback. And I agree. I totally agree with that sentiment. Again, the plan was for Greg Knapp to be there in 2021. Unfortunately, his tragic passing prevented that from happening. Then going into 2022, we touched on this before, but going into 2022, they wanted to just have less voices in Zach Wilson's ear. That was the rationale for not bringing in a veteran. But they're going to correct that this season. We'll see if Zach Wilson is the guy who benefits from it, or if it's a Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo. We're not going to get into the full quarterback discussion right now. We'll save that for a future stream. That probably could be a podcast in its own right, just talking all about the quarterback situation. But I think we could put a nice little bow on the Zach Wilson conversation and just say, we'll see. We'll see if he's on the roster. My prediction right now is that he is. Mike, what is your prediction? Do you think that Zach Wilson is on the Jets Week 1 2023 roster?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think at some point it'll be a Josh Rosen type thing where some team either is full of themselves from a coaching perspective. We can fix him. We saw the BYU Pro Day throw. We can get that arm back out of him again. We were watching those throws against Boise State and Little Sisters of the Poor and DeVry and ITT Tech and all those schools he played his last year, and we can get him back to that. And I feel like if they get a third-round pick, why not do it? Why not use that third-round pick on another quarterback, reset the clock? Then you get an actual starting quarterback who's not mentally scared to throw the ball 7 yards to an open receiver, and then we'll cook with that.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. And I think Zach Wilson's struggles and failures make it difficult to evaluate the 2022 season as a whole, right? Like, I think going into the year, a lot of Jets fans were like, all right, we want to see improvement. We want to see competitive football games in December. We want to see the Jets in the hunt. We want to see them push for a playoff spot. And we want to see Zach Wilson take that step forward and prove that he could be the franchise guy. Some of that happened. A lot of it did, but the Zach Wilson stuff didn't happen. And I think that combined with the late season collapse is why a lot of people have a skewed vantage point of how this season developed. And if this season was a success, if it was a failure, I think we should talk about that. Mike, I'll lay it to you first. Do you think that the Jets season in 2022, do you think it was a success or do you think it was a failure?
Absolutely a success. These people who are just now, all right, so you guys want to see improved play. You want to see the rookies play well, and you want to see meaningful football in December and January. That's what you wanted to see. You got it, and now you're still not happy. Not only are you not happy, you're not happy to the point where you want to fire the offensive coordinator, and I've seen some talking about the head coach. What do you want here? What, you thought this team was going to win 11 games, 12 games? I know the defense was great. I know Sauce Gardner, top 3 quarterback in the NFL right now. I get all that. And I look at the schedule first off. I mean, the AFC North, brutal division, 2 playoff teams, with Cincinnati and Baltimore. You get one of the toughest home divisions in the AFC East, where you got to play Josh Allen twice. You got to play the Miami Death Star crazy Tyreek Hill offense twice. And then you got to play Bill Belichick's defense twice. And then on top of that, the end of the season was winnable. Detroit almost made the playoffs. Jacksonville did. Seattle did. This was a tough schedule. 7-10 with there have been worse quarterbacks statistically than like Mike White. There was not a worse quarterback situation in the entire league than the New York Jets had. Maybe Carolina. I'll give you Carolina. But again, Carolina was in the easiest division in the league where Tampa Bay was 8-9 and they won it. What's going on here? Like, what? Now you got to go from 4-13 to the Super Bowl? Well, Cincinnati and Jacksonville, I get that. Look at Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence. You can win games with them. How are you supposed to win games with Mike White, Joe Flacco, Chris Streveler, Canadian Taysom Hill? How is this supposed to function? I just don't get it.
Hey, no Chris Streveler slander. All right, let's get that straight. No.
Chris Streveler. The fact he was even in that game on the right, like I get it was funny, like especially when he completed that little dump off pass and everybody.
Dude, I was in
the fact he's on a roster is just that's poor management, man.
I was in MetLife, and I honestly one of my favorite moments I've ever watched the Jets live was when Chris Streveler came into the game and just started miraculously. Like honestly, the pass that he had over the middle of the field, I'm already forgetting who it was to. Was it Conklin? I think Uzama, yeah, it was to Uzama. Was simultaneously one of the hypest and most disappointing moments because everybody in the stadium for that play, every single person. I don't know if you could see it live on TV, but in the stadium. Everybody saw Uzama open that entire play. You before Streveler even saw him, the entire crowd was like, oh my God, getting ready to get excited. And then Streveler threw it. And obviously it was, it was just, he can't even throw the ball 30 yards. But
they were running the triple option. It was like watching an Army-Navy game.
Yeah. Well, I forgot what I was about to say. Yeah. I mean, just, I think when it comes to the Jets season, right, it's fair to be upset and fair to be disappointed that they started 6-3, they started 7-4 and missed the playoffs. And I think if you take a step back, it's a success overall, but I also think that the Jets simultaneously overachieved and underachieved this year. They overachieved because they were 6-3 to start the year. They were 7-4. There was talks at one point after they had, beaten the Dolphins that, hey man, maybe, or after they beat the Bills too, maybe they could even push for division. That was a conversation that they could win the AFC East. Imagine saying that in August, that the Jets would be competing at a point in this season for the division. And it wasn't it was past week 1. That's an overachievement in its own right. Unfortunately, they then lost their last 6 games of the year. Now you could point to just, horrible quarterback play, Mike White getting hurt. That sucked. Breece Hall and Elijah Tucker getting hurt. That sucked. But you have to also look at that as a disappointment that they couldn't finish the job, that they did lose their final 6 games. They had a golden opportunity. Miami collapsed. They collapsed in the second half of the year. The Jets absolutely should have made the playoffs this year. If they win one of those Patriots games, if they win that Lions game, if they win the Jags game, games that were all winnable, if they win even one of them, Week 18 is a win-in-play-in game against Skylar Thompson like that, and it's hard not to think about that. So I'd say yes, the Jets season was a success because they did accomplish what their goal was, which was to play meaningful football in December, play meaningful football in January. They did that. They played on January 1st in a game where they were fighting for their playoff lives. That is already progress. That's significant progress. But considering where they were mid-season, they underachieved. It's also a disappointment because they could have done so much more.
Well, here's one thing that at least makes me a little more optimistic and a little less into the doom and gloom about, because it was a disappointing way to end the season. I get that. One of the big complaints I heard near the end of the season was, what is their identity? Are they a smash mouth team? Are they a West Coast team? Is it chuck it deep? Mike White was throwing 60 times a game. They had an identity in those first 4 games. We're going to run Breece Hall at you behind Elijah Vera Tucker. We're going to beat you down. Zach Wilson's going to make a couple of bit throws that are a little difficult. Like, I'm not saying Zach Wilson's never made a good throw in his life. He has. And then we're just going to smother you with this insane pass defense, which, by the way, never allowed a 300-yard passer. Joe Burrow at 275. He was the most. And they allowed 2 100-yard receivers the entire year. Amari Cooper week 2 at 101 and George Pickens week 4 at 102. So that's how good this defense is. And it's not really going anywhere because so many of the key pieces are staying here. So they had an identity in those games. Then what happens, I would say, I don't know about your best offensive player. Your most important, Breece Hall, done for the year. Elijah Vera Tucker, your second most, you could argue, done for the year. And then they're just bailing water trying to find anything that works. They're playing Mike White. They're playing Strevler running the single wing like it's Newt Rockney in the 20s. It just, this was just, I hate to use this excuse, it was just bad luck and just bad circumstance because every single injury happened, number one, at once, because Hall and Vera Tucker were at the same time, and it was just destabilizing.
Yeah. I will push back on some of that. I'll say that they, I guess it's officially fine to say this now because the season's over. They had remarkable injury luck on the defensive side of the ball. They had almost that entire, like going into week 18, that was pretty much their entire starting defense from week 1. The only missing piece was LaMarcus Joyner, which, if we're being honest, that's not much of a missing piece.
That's an upgrade, you could argue.
Yeah, honestly, it was. Like Tony Adams was actually an upgrade. But they were remarkably healthy in that side of the ball. Even a guy like Quan Alexander, who had played more than 12 games in his career once going into this year, he played all 17 games. Sauce Gardner played all 17 games. DJ Reed played all 17 games. Quinnen Williams missed 1 game. Carl Lawson played all 17 games, despite the fact that he had 2 Achilles surgeries in the offseason. So, I think they had remarkable luck on that side of the ball, which is part of the reason why the defense was as good as it was. I think that happens so often in the NFL. It's just like the team that stays the healthiest ends up succeeding the most. The Jets defense was great, legitimately great. And this isn't to take away from how good they were because Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed are the best cornerback duo in the NFL. And I know people will say James Bradbury and DJ Reed, but they're the best cornerback duo in the NFL. Quinnen Williams is a top 3 or 4 D tackle in the NFL right now. They have some really, really good pieces on that defense, but they're also very healthy. The offense struggling, yeah, you could absolutely blame that on injuries. But I also think it goes beyond that too. It's just, when you have bad quarterback play, that's going to tank everything. I've made a point of that on Twitter numerous times. And, people will pick apart this roster and pick apart the coaching staff and say all these things that are wrong. And that's absolutely correct. Like the Jets have weaknesses outside of quarterback. But if you get a good quarterback in there, if you get a Derek Carr, a Jimmy Garoppolo, whoever,
anybody
run the damn offense, all of those issues are going to seem so much more minuscule. They're not going to be they're going to just seem so much more insignificant. If you just have competent quarterback play, those issues, they don't disappear, but they're just less prominent. They're less prevalent. And I think that's something that Jets fans really just need to realize going into this offseason. Get a freaking quarterback, because that's something this organization has failed to do for decades. Get a damn quarterback, and all of these issues will seem a lot less significant.
I think it's the 2 factors that really make this, in my opinion, seem worse than it is just in a vacuum for happening to another team. Or number 1, the playoff drought, because the playoff drought is extended. For those that don't know, I believe it's now 12 consecutive years that the Jets have missed the playoffs, and Denver is in second place with 6, and that was coming off a Super Bowl. So there's really no one else close in terms of futility. And the fact that the quarterback situation is so dire, and there are times where even if you're playing poorly, as long as you got, like, look at the Bears, number 1 overall pick, lost 10 games in a row, worst defense in the league. They got Justin Fields. There's some optimism there. The fact that you had to watch this Mike White go 30 of 50, but get 12 points because he stunk in the red zone, or watch Zach Wilson go 16 of 28 for 150 when guys are wide open. He's chucking balls over guys' heads and hitting guys on the sideline. That made it more frustrating. I think if tensions calm down, you just take a breath and realize, okay, it's impossible to win games in the AF freaking C with all these great quarterbacks when you're playing what's left of Joe Flacco and Mike White with half of his ribs turned into chunky salsa. I think it might ratchet down the tensions just a little bit. It might make it seem, all right, you know what? All of our young players, for the most part, did pretty well. Garrett Wilson, hit. Sauce Gardner, super, super hit. Breece Hall, really good. Jermaine Johnson, above average in certain aspects, not bad for a rookie. Michael Clemens, very good for a 4th-round pick. Max Mitchell did his job. Jeremy Ruckert, 1 game, looked okay. Like, there's optimism there. Don't just go in there, oh, this is fire Salah. Oh, yeah, fire the guy that made the defense good. Yeah, that'll solve everything.
Agreed. We got another chat here from Kev. He said, Michael Nania had a good article today or stating that the Jets didn't prioritize quicker developing crossers and slants to hide the O-line weaknesses. Yeah, I think that they definitely could have done things over the last few games, specifically when the offensive line really started to struggle to take the pressure off the O-line, to just make the situation better. I do think somebody needs to answer for why the offensive line struggled as bad as they did. And I think that, you could see someone like John Benton, the offensive line coach, take the heat for that and take the fall ultimately if the Jets do want to make some coaching changes, because that offensive line wasn't awful for a lot of the year. And I know they had injuries. Like, I know that they had a revolving door at offensive tackle. I know Nate Herbig was playing banged up. I know Dwayne Brown was playing banged up. But the Jets' offensive line should not have been as bad as it was. And I know teams are stacking the box. I know I've heard it all. Like, you can make all the excuses. The Jets' offensive line, they had enough talent to not be – realistically, they were a bottom 5 unit for the last, 3-4 games of the season. They were really bad. And somebody needs to take the blame for that, whether that's John Benton, whether it's Mike LaFleur, whether it's the players themselves, because someone needs to explain why Laken Tomlinson has fallen off a cliff, because guy was
he's fine with the Jets. You know why.
Look, I know he was playing next to Trent Williams, and I understand that significantly helps him, and I expected regression. I think most Jets fans expected regression, but he was legitimately probably a bottom 8 to 10 guard in football this year. I think PFF had him bottom 8 or something. So he was really bad. He was really,
seems
really
like
bad.
a guy that I'd be willing to just say, you know what, sometimes you just have bad years. I'm not willing to just throw out a guy Pro Bowler, started for a long time in a similar offense. I get that he was bad near the end of the year, but if you want to say let's run it back one more year with Laken Tomlinson, I'd be fine with that.
Well, I think they have to. They're stuck to that contract for at least another year. I don't believe they can get out of it without eating just a significant amount of dead cap and not being able to replace him. So they're going to be stuck with him for another year. Hopefully he bounces back, but so I agree. I agree, Kev. Somebody does need to answer for the offensive line's weaknesses, and I think the Jets coaching staff could have done a better job to mask their issues. We do have another chat here from my buddy Nick. I see you, Nick. This is his Utah boy, Dalton Kincaid. He said, should the Jets consider Dalton Kincaid out of Utah to help the offense take pressure off Garrett Wilson? I do think that this is kind of an in-jest comment, but I do think that the Jets are pretty set at tight end. Conklin and Uzama will be coming back next year. They have Jeremy Ruckert. I like Dalton Kincaid, good player, but I don't
terrific receiver.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be looking for a tight end. Although Dalton Kincaid, it's a good player. I like Dalton Kincaid.
If they just go BPA and they cut Uzama, because I think they can get out of that contract, I wouldn't be crazy opposed to it. But I mean, if you're talking just draft needs, which are way down the road anyway, you got to go get some linemen, get some linebackers. That's where you got to sit. Dalton Kincaid's fine. Not a fit with the Jets personally for me, just because they got tight end.
I agree. They got more important positions to address. You can even look at their defense, linebacker, safety. One position they don't have to address is D tackle because of this man, Quinnen Williams. Obviously, the Quinnen Williams contract situation. You like that segue. I know you did.
That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Exactly. Quinnen Williams obviously was a very good player going into this season. And I think people knew that he was a very, very good player, but we hadn't seen him necessarily live up to the expectations of being a 3rd overall pick until this season when he broke out, finished with, you see there, 55 tackles, 52 pressures on significantly less snaps as well than a lot of the guys around him. 12 sacks. He was a phenomenal player, legitimately one of the top defensive tackles in football, in a fantastic defensive tackle season too, if I must say. I mean, you got Chris Jones was unreal this season. Dexter Lawrence was phenomenal. Jeffrey Simmons, Aaron Donald, Cam Hayward, Javon Hargrave. There are so many great defensive tackles this year, and Quinnen Williams was absolutely one of them. He was one of the best defensive players in football. So, of course, the Quinnen Williams discussion is, what is his contract situation? What is he going to be paid? Will the Jets pay him? They have, unfortunately, a recent history of not paying a lot of their star players. Now, of course, this is a different situation, but Mike, what are your thoughts on the Quinnen Williams situation? Do you think the Jets do extend him this offseason?
Well, I want to kind of ballpark what I think he's going to get, and this comes from our good buddy Rich Cimini at ESPN, who all Jets fans love and don't have a bad thing to say about ever.
Hey, we love Rich. Rich is a good guy.
We love you, Rich. We love you, Rich. He claims that Quinnen is thought to be seeking more than $21 million per year annually, which would make him the second highest paid defensive tackle in the league. But in all honesty, he's going to be the highest paid because Aaron Donald is the highest paid by so far a margin. And Aaron Donald's not even really a human. He's just like a Greek hero. He's like Perseus or someone of that ilk, or Kratos if you want a more cosmopolitan reference. Like that's where Aaron Donald is. So it's almost not even worth comparing him to Aaron Donald. Now, $21 million would take him above Chris Jones and Leonard Williams. And honestly, I know that it's tough because the Jets have so many young players that they have to pay eventually. Like, you got to save room for a Sauce Gardner extension and a Breece Hall extension and a Vera Tucker extension and however much money you're going to pay to get this new quarterback in. But this is a complete culture changer, culture setter, especially for Robert Saleh's defense, because for a defensive lineman, this is both an ideal scheme and it's also one of the toughest. It's very similar to that Tampa Monty Kiffin thing where they're going to blitz 4 linemen a lot. They're really not going to take a ton of chances like compared to the rest of the league. So on one hand, it gives you a lot of individual freedom as a defensive tackle because he trusts you a lot. But on the other hand, if you don't play well, you really get isolated a lot, and it's very easy to see who's not performing well. Cough, cough, Carl Lawson. So if you,
Carl Lawson played through some crazy, like he was barely running before training camp.
He tried hard. I'm not going to say he didn't try, but I mean, there were times where he was just getting washed out of place. Mm-hmm. But if you lose Quinnen Williams, there is nobody that will be available that is going to be close to Quinnen Williams. And you're not going to use some of your premium draft capital on a Quinnen Williams replacement when you have so many other pressing needs. So this is a deal that they have to get done. Have to. Priority number 2 after quarterback. Get this thing done.
Agreed. I think that Joe Douglas knows that. Joe Douglas knows how good Quinnen Williams is. I know that they said people were like reading into his quote in his post game or his postseason interview where he basically was non-committal about it. He didn't say we are going to sign Quinnen Williams. I think a lot of that is just him trying to not back himself into a corner like he did Jamal Adams when they said Jamal Adams is, he's going to be a Jet for life. That was the famous quote that went around. That was the infamous quote. And unfortunately that didn't happen. That kind of was an old take exposed, whatever you want to say. And I think Joe Douglas is just trying to avoid a situation like that. I would be very, very surprised, like stunned and also livid if the Jets did not extend Quinnen Williams this offseason. I do think they will. I think that it's going to be like a reasonable contract for someone like him too. He's a 25. He just turned 25. He's one of the best defensive players in football coming off a career year. I will also say this. He has handled this situation in the most team-friendly way possible. He could have made us think about this last offseason. I know
absolutely he
didn't because he was banking on himself and it worked out, but like he could have made us think about this way before then. So I have zero issues with him coming out this week and saying, hey, I won't attend voluntary OTAs if I don't get an extension. He shouldn't. He has absolutely earned that extension. There's no reason why he shouldn't be given this money. He's done everything right on and off the field. I think he will get that money. I think realistically, you're probably looking at like ballpark 4 years, $95 million, something like that, right? Where it's, a little shy of $25 million a year, I think is reasonable. I do think it'll be over that $21 million. If it's not, awesome. Like if it's around 21, 22 million, great, because I got the numbers pulled up. DeForest Buckner is the second highest paid D tackle behind Aaron Donald in AAV, and his is 21 million, right? So if you're
say Quinnen's better than DeForest Buckner right now,
yes, I would definitely say that Quinnen Williams had a better season than DeForest Buckner for sure. I think looking at those numbers, by the way, Chris Jones underpaid because he was unbelievable this season.
Absolutely. I mean, he had to take a little less because of that Mahomes contract, but I mean, yeah, what a deal for for Brett Veach, man. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's like Atlanta Braves level of stealing talent for cheap.
definitely. I know somebody that will be paying close attention to Quinnen Williams' contract situation is Jeffrey Simmons, because he also has he's also looking for a new contract very soon, perhaps as soon as this offseason. But I do think the Jets ultimately do extend Quinnen Williams. I think it'll be roughly around 4 years, 95 million. The guarantees will be interesting. I'd imagine it won't go up to like 50K or 50K, 50 million in
That'd be amazing.
50K. You can just cut him whenever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it'll go up to 50 million. It'll probably be around somewhere like 40 to 45, which is what the market has been set as right now. So I think that that's realistic what you're looking at. If we know anything about Joe Douglas too, the way that he's structured contracts in the past, they'll have an out after year two, probably. It maybe for Quinnen Williams would be different, maybe an out after year three, but he'll have some kind of out in there because they have shown, that they don't want to be locked into contracts long term. And even with, Carl Lawson, we brought him up a little bit, and I know Kev has another point here. He said that read somewhere that Lawson had a second surgery before OTAs, so he might be better next year, but cap savings along with playing more, Jermaine Johnson and Bryce Huff makes sense. Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely talk more about potentially, potential cuts for the Jets, potential cap casualties. Carl Lawson is a name that will be brought up because they can essentially walk on or move on from him for nothing. Like I think it's less than $1 million in dead cap. Again, because of the way that Joe Douglas has structured that contract. So maybe they'll move on from him. But I do agree that, yeah, I know you mentioned Carl Lawson before. He was underwhelming this season. Just to get sidetracked for a moment, but I think so much of that was that dude it's a miracle he even played 17 games. Considering that same report that Kev's referring to was from Connor Hughes, SNY's Connor Hughes, and he said that Lawson was not even running before training camp. Like that's where he was at because he had to have a second Achilles surgery. But yeah, just for Quinnen Williams, I do think they extend him. I think it'll be a reasonable enough deal, and I think it'll be the first major. I know they've re-signed John Franklin Myers, but this will be the first like true superstar the Jets have extended since Muhammad Wilkerson. Like it's been a long time.
I think he might be the most recent first-round pick that they've given an extension to.
Yeah, I think you're right.
They didn't do it with Sheldon Richardson.
Nope.
They certainly didn't do it with Calvin Pryor and Darren Lee and just this graveyard of busts. Now, let me put my tinfoil hat on for a second because I think this is actually an interesting dynamic with the whole Quinnen Williams thing. I wonder how much Quincy is going to come into play. Like, obviously, it'd be cool, the brothers playing together. Is Quinnen saying, look, if I sign, you also got to sign my brother back? Is he going to take less money to play with his brother? I think that's something worth watching, especially because, if I'm being honest, Quincy's an NFL linebacker, but like as a starter for a defense of this caliber, I'm really not sure because if you look at the cornerbacks, mostly the starting nickel package with Sauce, DJ Reed, and Michael Carter, they only gave up 4 touchdowns all season long in primary coverage. So where did the other ones come from? How else were they moving the ball? How was Trevor Lawrence finding Evan Ingram? They were going at guys like Quincy Williams. So I do wonder if he's going to have some say, if Quinnen is going to go, you know what, I'll take less to play with him, or if I come back, bring him back or I'm going somewhere else, because that's happened before, especially with a lot of quarterback contracts. I know Quinnen is not a quarterback, obviously, but we've seen stars of a certain ilk say, get this guy to be my backup or I'm leaving. That's not unprecedented. Carson Palmer, I remember, was big on that. That's why I get frustrated with the Bengals, because he said, bring John Kitna back as my backup, and they didn't. So Quincy's okay. I think he's a fine backup, and you know what? If he helps bring Quinnen back, let's go 56.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up. I do think that could play into the role. I know they have the same agent as well. Nicole Lynn is, I believe, both of their agents. So that also could play a factor. I'm not sure it'll be a deal breaker, but it could be one of those where it's like, hey, if you could bring back Quincy Williams, or maybe Quincy Williams gets offers from other teams and the Jets extend Quinnen Williams, but then maybe they can bring back Quincy for less money because Quincy wants to play with his brother. I think something like that could happen. I know the Jets coaching staff absolutely loves Quincy Williams. They love his heart. They love his motor. He is one of the most volatile players in the entire NFL. Like I truly, I'm not sure there's another player that I could think of that is more volatile, just from highest of highs to the lowest of lows than Quincy Williams. He'll flash moments where he looks like an all-pro linebacker, where he'll just shoot into the gap and just make a huge hit in the backfield. But then he'll have moments where you're just like, what is this guy doing? Or he's basically kind of a runaway train and he'll derail and miss a tackle. It happens a lot with him. I do think the Jets need to upgrade a linebacker, but I'm not opposed to bringing back Quincy Williams, especially like you said, if it helps bring back Quinnen Williams, that would be great.
They're not joined at the hip.
I know. Last thing, Kev said that one more chat here. He said Bart Scott proposed extending Quinnen Williams, make Orlando Brown Jr. the highest paid offensive tackle, sign Dalvin Thompson to free up Quinnen Williams. As far as Orlando Brown goes, I don't think that's a move the Jets make. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he really struggle this year?
You bet he did.
Yeah,
what do you want, like $25 million a year too?
Yeah, I think he really struggled this year. I don't think they should do that. As a rule of thumb, and this is not meant to be a shot, don't listen to Bart Scott too often. I love Bart. He's obviously a Jets legend, and but just don't always take everything he says. Take everything he says with a grain of salt. But I don't think the Jets would do that. I don't think Orlando Brown is a good fit for this scheme at all, unless they're willing to switch up this scheme. And go more power run, and they had some success with that this year. But I think that I don't know if that would make the most sense for them. But
if you watched the Jets this year and your takeaway was, Quinnen Williams was being a little bit limited, I feel like that's not probably the I don't know about the most accurate. I think it might be the best way to say it. I think that the proper take was, holy crap, what are these quarterbacks doing? And that should be,
yeah, for sure, man, for sure. Well. Yeah. That's probably going to do it for us today. We went about an hour. I appreciate everybody stopping by for our first stream. This was so much fun, Mike. I had a blast. I'm sure you did as well. And yeah, be sure to, we'll hit all the stuff. Be sure to subscribe, like, hit that notification bell, do all that stuff. You can follow me on Twitter at Justin T. Fried. Follow Mike on Twitter at by Mike Luciano. Of course, follow the Jet Press on Twitter at the Jet Press. You can download the Jet Press podcast wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, all that stuff. Yeah, of course. And check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, all that stuff. You know what to do. Thank you guys for listening to the Jet Press podcast. I've been Justin Fried. That's been Mike Luciano. And we got a cool graphic to end this thing. And I'm excited to show it.
You bet we do. Thank you guys for joining in. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.